What is Palestine and what is Israel? I would like Mr. Hill to first respond.
Okay, thank you. Didn't know that question was coming. Thank you. Just curious, how many people here identify as pro-Palestinian? Okay, just making sure. All right. Seeing if it was a home game or not, you know?
Looks like you got a representation there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, that question, it was added here by me just because I felt like we needed to define. I think it's a good way to get into it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it's a complicated question in some ways. If we're talking about at this very moment, Israel is a nation. It is a country, is a nation state. It is recognized globally as such. Palestine, after this week, may have a different designation based on the UN Security Council's decisions, but ultimately, Palestine's a little more complicated. Palestine right now, when some people say Palestine, they're referring to the occupied territories. When some people say Palestine, they're referring to all of historic Palestine, meaning they're referring to everything from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Some people are referring to the pre-1967 borders. When people say Palestine, it can mean different things because as a legal category, it's complicated. If we're talking about Israel, it also can be complicated. Again, in 2024, what Israel means is very different than what Israel would mean in 1947 or in 1800. And I think we would be historically dishonest if we were to pretend that Israel only begins in 1948, both as an idea, but also as a cultural and religious and spiritual commitment to Jewish people around the world. Israel's meant lots of things to lots of people throughout history, from the Torah until this moment. And so that's a very professorial way of answering a question, right? I don't want to give you a clear legal definition because I think the words are too complicated. And the terms mean too many different things. But as a legal category, if we're talking about the recognition of Israel, Israel is a nation state and has been since 1948 when the US made the first call to recognize Israel as such. And I imagine that very, very soon, hopefully, we'll see a Palestine that is also recognized as a clear, unequivocal, unambiguous nation state that will be due and given all of the same affordances of any other nation state.
Thank you very
much. Good evening, everyone. I'm not going to ask you how many of you are pro or anti, because it really doesn't matter. I start the answer of what Palestine is and what Palestine is not. Palestine was never a country. Palestine is not a nation. Palestine is not ethnicity. Palestine is a colonial term created by the British, and the lifespan of Palestine was less than 30 years. It was exactly 25 years. It was the British mandate of Palestine. Not Palestine as a territory, but the mandate's name was Palestine. So some political gangs led by Yasser Arafat, criminals, con artists, used the term to just create hostility to a legitimate nation that is Israel, that is before history, that has faith, that has language, that its people have been resilient against so many attempts for ethnic cleansing. And they have survived. The most resilient nation on earth, in fact. And the nation that has contributed to humanity more than any other nation. And what's called Palestine wants somehow to replace Israel. is totally dependent on the destruction of Israel. It's a very broad term. And it's been used by so many criminals who have been using children as fuel for their revolution. Corrupt revolution, the most corrupt revolution, adapted the name of Palestine as a cover. And now I see many gangs around the world adapting the same term. So Palestine is non-existential. It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you. Um, 1:30. Oh, 2 minutes, yes. Go ahead.
So you'll be shocked to know that I disagree. First, to say that Palestine was never a country, sure. But the idea of the country or the nation state is a relatively new one. It's only in the last 100 years, particularly after World War I, that we began to develop things like the League of Nations. We moved from empires to actual nation states. There have always been nations, but not countries, right? Do we say Rome wasn't a country, right? There's a difference between nations and countries, between nations and nation states. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Palestine was never a country. It's just not the point. Second, Palestine certainly has existed before the Yasser Arafat and certainly has existed before the founding of the PLO, presumably is implicit in your claim about Yasser Arafat. If you read, for example, 1911, there's a newspaper that was created by Arabs who called themselves Palestinians at the time. And they were responding to these waves of Zionist immigration. And you know what they named their newspaper in 1911? You can look this up for yourselves. They called it Philistine, right? Philistine, Palestine. And there were conversations about being Ahad Philistine. There were conversations about being the people of Palestine. There were conversations about Palestinian culture. I agree with you. There hasn't always been a Palestine, but everything is invented. It's like when black people celebrate Kwanzaa, people say that's a made-up holiday. Yeah, all holidays are made up, right? Like, it didn't fall out of the sky, right? Nations are built. Nations are constructed. Cultures are constructed. Language is constructed. Over the last 150 years, we have seen the development of a Palestinian culture. I don't disagree with you that Palestinian culture is a response to the emergence of Zionism in many ways. That's true, but that doesn't make it less real. You and I just spent the last 10 minutes outside speaking Arabic, and we weren't speaking Fusha Arabic to each other. We were speaking what? Palestinian Arabic. So there is a language, there is a culture.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
The reason I said that Palestine never existed as a country, because the entire narrative of apartheid, colonialism, occupation is understood as Palestine used to be a country, then the Zionist entity came and occupied that country or that territory, which is false. And the false narrative, believe it or not, my observation my entire life, that leads eventually to violence. So this is why I'd like to define Palestine. What is Palestine? If it's not a country, then we are on the same page, and we can take the conversation from here forward. Most Palestinians who claim to be Palestinians are just Arabs. This is their ethnicity. I am an Arab. I was born Arab. Yasser Arafat established PLO and Palestine in Egypt, and he wanted me to take that identity. Hence, I refuse. My birth certificate says on it Jordanian, as hundreds of thousands of people from the West Bank were born Jordanians. The ones who were born in Gaza were Egyptians. And when the PLO was established, they did not include the West Bank and Gaza actually as their aim for liberation, because the West Bank was Jordanian and Gaza was Egyptian. Then The Arabs had their opportunity to build an Arab state, and they missed the opportunity. So to come today and represent Palestine, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, what does that mean? If there was no Palestine?